Good morning. These videos we've been watching each week, these little bumper videos, kind of walk through the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus talks about a lot of different stuff, right? And I think we're 7 or 8 weeks into this Living Jesus Sermon on the Mount sermon series. Living Jesus is the name of the book that Randy Harris wrote. And some of us have been in small groups reading it or reading it on our own. And we've been kind of sharing each week what that looks like and kind of going over each of these chapters as some extra kind of insight as we go through each week. Last week, we didn't do rock, paper, scissors, okay? But last week, Justin got to talk about adult content, right? And so I promise you that the only thing I did is we were trying to figure out which weeks work best. And a lot of times, just to kind of give you some insight on how we decide who's preaching what, is based off of like what we're excited about or passionate about sharing. And we can kind of say, God's really been speaking to me this way. I want to take this. This series is so long, we wanted to kind of break out the series. Well, I so happened got to be in charge of the weeks and who was going to share which week. I didn't have the list in front of me, but unfortunately for Justin, or lucky for Justin got last week. I told him I'd give him this week off. But this week, we're going to look at Matthew chapter 5 in a few minutes. But I want to start off as we look at the scripture here. I want us to think about those people in our lives that's always got a good story. Okay? Think about those who always have something crazy. Or maybe like at the dinner table or around the lunch at work, where you may find somebody that is really good about sharing crazy stories. They're really good at one-upping people. You know those kind of people? If you don't know those kind of people, guess what you are? You're the one-up person. The person that's got a better story, no matter how crazy or awesome of a story that one person has, there's that person that always seems to be around, no matter whether it's family or work or at the grocery store, right? You end up finding that one person that wants to tell even a better story, right? It happens at work sometimes, and I'm not intentional about trying to do that, or the teachers that I eat lunch with aren't necessarily trying to do that. Like we're not, but every once in a while we get 4, 5, 6 stories in, and you kind of notice what happens, right? Like they each get a little crazier, and I try to say I'm not a one-up person, but reality is I love to fish. And we kind of, as people who like to fish, we kind of end up probably making it a little more intense and awesome fish stories than what's actually happening, right? Some of you may be saying, no, well, you're lying. We're talking about that today. So think about those people that one-up you. Now, I thought about taking a minute and grabbing a couple of you, and I would have taken volunteers, but grabbing a few of you and making you practice some one-up to crown a one-up person today, the best person in church to be able to one-up. But we're not. But think about that. We kind of find ourselves doing that sometimes, don't we? And think about our motive behind that. Sometimes it's just like, oh, we have a story similar, and we're trying to relate and connect, and we're just carrying conversation, so we share, right? But if we're not careful, what does that end up doing for us? We're trying to have a better story, right? We're trying to have a more interesting life on display, right? We kind of do that with our social media sometimes. We kind of make our life look a lot better, a lot more interesting and entertaining and what people would want than maybe what's reality, right? We kind of find ourselves doing that, and sometimes we don't do it intentionally, but we kind of find ourselves in that direction. Today we're going to talk a little bit about that and some of that theme. I want us to look at Matthew chapter 5 as we start off. And this is our part of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, of course. We're going to look at Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 through 37. Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago. You know what that means? Old people used to say this, right? Jesus is saying, now old people used to say this. a long time ago. Again, you have heard that it was said to people long ago, do not break your oath, but keep the oaths you have made to the Lord. But I tell you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by earth, for it is the footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. Simply let your yes be yes, and your no, no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one. Some of us can read this passage and make it very convenient for us, myself included. We can read this passage and say, well, they're talking about swearing, right? Or an oath. That maybe, somebody might like to pull this out who's on trial, right? Or they're supposed to give a testimony. And they say, and they don't want it because they make them look guilty, right? And so then they can say, no, the Bible says that I'm not supposed to swear on an oath, right? So I can't do it. Jesus is talking about so much more than that, right? Because that's just a convenient interpretation to work to your advantage when your back's up against the wall in court, right? There's so much more that this passage is talking about. This passage is about swearing. It's about telling the truth, right? It's about the integrity that we have. Now, I think about integrity and telling the truth. There are a few types of people in the world that we can immediately go to. I'm sure most of our minds go to politicians, don't they? Right? Or certain careers where maybe they're not very good at truth-telling or keeping their word. But here's the reality. We're all pretty pitiful at it, myself included. Like, we all fall short of this expectation to let our yes be our yes and our no be our no. So the media, and we like to feed into what the media is displaying, whether it's a professional athlete who said they didn't take steroids and then they got caught, we like to bash them big time, right? Or maybe a politician who's been caught in a scandal, or a politician who's not true to their word. But we all kind of fall short of that. Jesus tells us we shouldn't be swearing at all. Now, when I think of swearing, I think of like promising, right? Like, no, I swear, promise, I didn't do it. Or, I promise I did do it, right? We think of that. Now, just growing up, I remember things that we used to say as kids, right? When we was trying to convince our buddies of something that was true, right? Or something that we didn't do. You know, we could say, I swear on my life, right? Because that has more meaning to it, doesn't it? Or my grandma's grave, right? I don't know why we used to say that. It's kind of morbid, ain't it? Or I swear on my mom's life, or I swear on the Bible, or things like that. No, I promise, right? We say those things all the time because sometimes our word isn't good enough because it's not trustworthy enough, right? Sometimes we fall short of being high and having integrity in our life. So sometimes it's hard for other people to really believe something because it doesn't appear that way, and maybe we found ourselves not to be trustworthy at certain times or certain situations. So we find ourselves in that situation where we feel like we have to say something more than just a yes or just a no, don't we? Behavioral economists in the book Randy talks about, there was a study done by them, and the study was to test to see if people would cheat or not. So they encouraged people to cheat. Okay, money was involved. Okay, they had two groups. One group was asked to write down all the 10 Commandments they could remember before they were encouraged and tempted to cheat. The other group was encouraged to write down the most recent movies they had seen. Okay? So then they wanted to see how much of an impact Scripture had, the 10 Commandments had, on the decision-making right then. So they were asked to do that, and then they were prompted, they were tempted. Anybody guess what the results were? Don't answer it if you already read that chapter. those who wrote down the Ten Commandments cheated far, far less. You know, they just wrote what they could remember of the Ten Commandments. Now, just by thinking about those commandments caused their desire to cheat to decrease. Just by thinking about and having reflected on those just briefly before caused the cheating to decrease in that situation. What does that say about the power of our Scripture? Right? Just stop and reflect on that for a second. The Scripture of just thinking about the Ten Commandments before we're prompted, right? What if we had more Scripture in our lives instead of just knowing some of the Ten Commandments? What if we had read in the morning or on our lunch break or before we went to bed or all three? How much more would Scripture be a part of our life and our decision making? Right? I'm guilty as well. We far too often we don't set that time aside to allow God to speak to us. And then far too often we find ourselves in a mess that we have to clean up or ask God to clean up. Power of Scripture is not to be overseen. See, a lot of times our integrity is for sale, like in this example, right? They had money, so they were okay with cheating because they made a little cash. Most of our integrity can be sold for that right cost. Now, you know, sometimes we think of some greater, crazy events, but just dial it back a little bit and think about some ways that we might just subtly give up integrity for a small cost. Like the fish story, right? We want people to laugh or we want people to be impressed, right? And so I give up a little bit of my integrity to stretch the truth, to lie, to not be honest, right? What about when you're talking and you're sharing a conversation, somebody asks if you'd seen a movie or read that book? Why do we do it? Sometimes we say yeah when we know we haven't, right? We give up a little bit. We give up with that integrity just a little bit. Often our integrity goes through a cost-benefit analysis. We weigh our options. Is it worth the risk? Right? Should I make that gamble? Examples. Maybe you're at work, before or after work, or during lunch break, and you find yourself around a gossip group. Right? Is it worth that risk to go along with things or to say something as well? We give up a little bit of our integrity right then. When we start talking about things, we don't really know what's going on, right? Or maybe we're storytelling because we're trying to impress something, trying to make people think we know something or we have an awesome life, right? So we end up just stretching the truth just a little bit. We lose a little bit of our integrity, don't we? See, we think about these crazy examples of are we forced to do something, but there are so many small ways where we give up our integrity just to kind of get a response. See, the decisions to always tell the truth and to do the right thing is a difficult one. Think about always telling the truth. Now, I'm not saying you always have to get on Facebook and air your dirty laundry. That's not what we're talking about this morning. But just always telling the truth. How many times would Kevin have to shake his head no when somebody asked if he spent time with God before preparing for the day, right? Somebody started asking me that, and I really had to tell the truth every day. What about those opportunities we have? It can be difficult, can't it? There's a movie called Courageous, and it's been out for several years. But they have a great example of where this can lead. You know, these little examples where we have maybe to laugh when somebody's making fun of somebody or jump in on that or to not tell the truth over here. These small little examples lead to us being more risky again and again. and it just kind of eats away at us. Before we know it, we're in a difficult situation where we know what's right, but we're trying to decide if we should do that or not. So let's watch this video.
Martinez, have a seat.
Thank you, sir.
You've been very productive your first month here. You do good work.
I'm very grateful to be here.
Well, Mr. Martinez, the reason I called you in here is that I'm looking for an additional manager to oversee inventory and shipping. Carries more responsibility, but it pays more. Sound like something you might be interested in?
Yes, I would.
But before I make my final decision, I'd like for you to work a shift in that department next week. You'll see a list of 17 crates coming in on this sheet. One of those crates will be going to a separate warehouse. Mr. Martinez, when you report the inventory, I'd like for you to report that we received 16 crates.
17 are coming in. But you want me to write down 16?
Yes, that's right. I have another purpose for the extra crate. You are on my team, right? Because I really can't use people who aren't on my team. Tell you what. You think about it tonight and give me your answer in the morning. Make it 10 o'clock. But I'll need to know if you really want this job.
Good evening, sir.
Javi, we need this job. For the first time in a year, we're able to pay the bills.
I know, Carmen, but he made it very clear. If I was not a team player, he did not want me there.
Maybe it's not wrong. It just looks that way. He's the owner of the factory.
He asked me to write down false information, Carmen. He asked me to lie.
When do you have to give him an answer?
10 o'clock.
Javi, if he lets you go, promise me that you will call me. If you don't, then I know everything is okay. Javi, I don't want us to go back.
Good morning, sir.
Morning, Mr. Martinez. How are you this morning?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
I don't know yet. Please, have a seat. I trust you've had time to think about our conversation yesterday.
Yes, sir, I did.
And what did you decide? Are you on my team?
Mr. Tyson, I am very grateful to have a job here. But I cannot do as you have asked.
And why is that?
Because it is wrong, sir. And it would be dishonoring to my God and my family to lie on that report.
Do you understand what this may do to your job here?
Yes, sir, I do.
Javier, may I shake your hand? Young man, you just gave me the right answer. I've been looking for someone to manage inventory and shipping, and quite frankly, you were the last person on my list. But I need somebody I can trust. Will you take the job? We'll adjust your pay.
I would be honored to, sir.
Good. Then the job is yours. Now, Walter will go over all the specifics with you, and I'll make the announcement to the staff on Monday. Congratulations, Javier. Oh, and Javier, thanks for your integrity. It's rare.
Well done, Javier. After 6 times, I was getting discouraged.
Now, I feel like the videos has some poor acting, because if that was me in that situation, I had made that choice, I would have been dancing and jumping out of that office, right? And probably would have taken the rest of the day off to go fishing. But think about this. Anyone can display integrity when it leads to success, right? When you know it has an opportunity to lead to success that everybody else around you will see, it's easy to make that choice, ain't it? It's a lot easier. But what happens when that integrity leads you to the cross? Do you make that same choice? When it causes more burden on you to carry that weight, the weight of the cross, do we make that same decision? Do we make that decision that he makes, knowing that our family and the well-being of our family could be at stake? See, if we go through life deciding whether we're going to tell the truth, even in small ways, or whether we're going to tell the truth or not based off of this cost-benefit analysis, we're going to be lying a lot. We're going to find ourselves wrapped around all these little lies because it's too convenient, ain't it? It's too that instant gratification instead of thinking about eternity. So if people can't believe what you say, what will they think when you want to tell them about your God, about your Jesus? Think about the people that you care about the most and the love you have for them and how passionate you may be about them having the same eternity that you have. But if we can't be truthful, if we can't have that integrity, why would they want to listen to hear about our God? Proverbs 11:13 says this: a gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret. Are you trustworthy? Because there's people all around you looking to see if you're able to make the right choice. Every day. At the grocery store, at the gas station, at the restaurants, in your family, in this church. Looking to see if you'll do the right thing. If you have that integrity. 2 Corinthians 1, verse 12, goes on to say this. Now, this is our boast. This is Paul writing to the church. This is our boast. Our conscience testifies that we have conducted ourselves in the world, and especially in our relationship with you. So he's talking about the people that believe, with integrity and godly sincerity. We have done so, relying not on worldly wisdom, but on God's grace. That last sentence, they're able to display the integrity and the godliness not because of their own wisdom or the wisdom that the world's given them, right? But it's because of the grace of God they're able to do that. As we close out and we sing, and I want you to reflect on this morning and this week. Are you only honest when it leads to success? When it benefits you? Is that the only time you're honest? Or do you find yourselves being honest only then a lot of the times? What about being honest when it makes you look bad? When you tell your spouse you didn't do what you said you were going to do, or you tell your boss you didn't do it, or a friend that really needed you, you don't make an excuse for not being there when somebody needs you. You just say, I've messed up. Are you honest then? If you have a hard time with that, why do you think you're lying? Why do you think you're making excuses for it? Because again, that reflects back on who our God is, isn't it? So this week, examine your hearts. Expose the roots of your dishonesty. Why are you dishonest? Where do you find yourself being dishonest? Ask God to just invade that space, to get rid of it, so that people can look at you and say that you're an honest person, that you're a man or a woman of God that has the integrity that only God can provide, right? Not integrity that leads to success, but integrity that leads to the cross. Let's stand, let's pray, and we'll worship. God, we thank you so much for the love you have for us, God. We thank you for the example you've given us in Jesus. Thank you for the integrity he had. It's so evident. God, I just pray that you'll just surround us with the courage and strength and power to be men and women of you. And just claim that, God. God, I pray that you'll surround us with people that will speak truth and wisdom into us so that we can be empowered to make those decisions, even when it leads to the cross, God. It's in your Son's name I pray.